Dead Cells. Ah, Dead Cells. One of man's greatest indie game creations to ever come into existence. Dead Cells was made and published by three of the best artists Baguette Land has ever produced, who with their powers combined, they formed Captain Planet. Who with their powers combined, they formed Motion Twin. Initially conceived as a tower defense game, which was supposed to be a sequel to their popular Flash game, Die Tonight. And thank goodness the tower defense idea was left by the wayside. These geniuses of men decided to change the cooperative gameplay of their popular browser game, Die Tonight, into a combat-focused action game centered around a single-player experience. But then, the last transformation to Ultra Instinct Goku happened. Being avid fans of Team Fortress 2 and a nice toasted baguette with butter, these Frenchmen, who can make anyone's panties soaking wet by smoking a cigarette in a cool manner, took inspiration from the engineer class in Team Fortress 2. They remade Dead Cells into a Metroidvania action platformer roguelike, where the player would use a combination of a slew of items and weapons, which became Dead Cells' final form. I also want to remind my audience, and whoever lends me their time by watching the video, to remember that I'm only scratching the surface regarding the history of how one of the most important, not just indie games, but games in general, who possibly even had a hand in changing the gaming landscape entirely, was ever created, since it was released at a time where gamers were being disgruntled and disillusioned with AAA gaming and the gaming industry as a whole. Released at a time where gaming companies were promoting DLCs before the full games ever made it to store shelves. At a time where microtransactional systems were being made the priority by these huge publishers, while forcing developers to work overtime with absolute shit pay, while the CEOs of these companies have severance packages worth more than certain countries' GDP to make a game around these systems, causing multiple games to come out feeling soulless, rushed, broken, in an unfinished state, and made you feel like instead of playing a game, you are on a shitty trip with the boys to Vegas, only to realize that broke college students can't really have the Vegas experience because you need money to gamble away in the first place. The first thing broke college students can gamble away is their Costco pack of ramen noodles, and needs to last them 2 years, but the pack only brings 24. And we will never know how the math adds up. And the bottle of half-drunken pineapple Amsterdam, released on all platforms August 7, 2018, and beloved by critics and users alike, winning multiple awards, having an overwhelming positive review, over 100,000 gamers on Steam alone, and selling over 10 million copies across all platforms as the recording date of this video. Dead Cells is nothing short of a masterpiece, a magnum opus, or as the people at Baguette Land would say, pièce de résistance. Mwah. Now we can't talk about the game itself without shining a little light on the developer's Motion Twin, the studio. Motion Twin is a group of 7 people. You hear that, EA? 7 freaking people. When games are made by people who care with straight determination, ambition, constraint, a dream, and untouched by greedy publisher Shrek-looking sausage hands that don't know shit about game development, whose solution to everything is to throw more money at it, what comes out is a product beloved by its players. What I also find fascinating about Motion Twin is that they operate like the legendary hacktivist group Anonymous. They don't have a boss or a leader. They all have equal power, input, and they all matter when it comes to the creation of their games. What I also want to highlight regarding Motion Twin is that this was basically their first attempt into making a game for consoles and PC, aside from a game called Alpha Bounce for the Switch. Predating that, every game that they made before were browser flash games. Now you can argue that making browser games gave them the experience needed to make Dead Cells. While yes, logically that makes sense, but I'll argue that's not enough experience. And I would also argue that developing for Flash and developing for console and PC are 2 different skills entirely. Now this is definitely an assumption, hence me not knowing anything about programming and game development. But there are multiple examples out there in the wild of developers of Flash and browser-based games jumping into developing for console and PC for the first time, and the first game they come out with is a freaking disaster. So for Motion Twin to make basically a flawless game for the first time jumping ship, from developing for Flash to developing for a whole different system they weren't seasoned in, is really nothing short of amazing. I'm glad we took that turn, because I always believe that when you find something you love, you should always put a name and tie it to the person and or people who made that product, media, and or piece of art possible for you to love in the first place. They should always be given praise and acknowledgement when they hit it out the park, because they made something that you hold near and dear to your heart. They made something that supplied you with endless memories, filled you with positive emotion, and gave you a book of stories to tell. We should be extra diligent in doing so, because you and I both know that when we don't like something, nobody has to tell us twice to get up on the highest mountaintop and shout so hard that we pass out about why we don't like that thing. So we should do the same thing when we do. What is Dead Cells? Dead Cells is an action platformer Metrovania roguelike, and I know that was a mouthful. Depending who you ask, some may add Soulsborne into that list as well.
The gameplay loop.
Dead Cells' gameplay loop can be boiled down to this. In its simplest form, every time you start a game of Dead Cells, the player is starting a run. What is a run, you may ask? A run is basically starting a new game in other games comparatively. But when it comes to Dead Cells, a run is you playing a new game within a game. Think of a run as you're playing a mini game in a much larger game, and the goal of that run is to do as much, complete as much, and bring back as much from that mini game so you can unlock more and expand the more larger game, the overarching game, if you will. This is where the roguelike system will come into play. Everything that you gain, built into, bought in that particular run, once you die, you lose all of it. The only thing that you get to keep are the cells you gain during that run. Comparing it to Dark Souls, which I believe I'm the first one to ever compare something to Dark Souls in the history of the internet. Cells are like souls in Dark Souls. With these cells, you will bring it back to the Firekeeper. With these cells, you will bring it back to the Collector, which is an NPC in Dead Cells, equivalent to Dark Souls' Firekeeper. When you bring these cells back to the Collector, it allows you to unlock permanent upgrades to assist you on your runs. For example, like more charges to your Estus Flask. Health Flask. I may have lied a little bit, but hear me out. Yes, while I said that in every subsequent run, if you die, you lose everything, except for your cells. That's not completely true. You lose your cells also. The only way you keep your cells is if you come out of that particular biome alive.
The fuck is a biome?
A biome is how you say level in Baguette Land. No, I'm just fucking you. I'm just fucking with you. Seriously speaking, a biome is just another word for a level. Unlike the Souls game, where if you have 30,000 souls on you, and you see a gang squad around the corner, you can basically just homeward bone out, back to Firelink Shrine, and spend those souls, and then go back to be on the shoot for a Bang Bros production. In Dead Cells, not really. See, Dead Cells is comprised of biomes, and in between every biome you complete, there's a safe area which you can heal up, reforge your weapon affixes, grab mutations, etc. And these rest areas are the only places where the Collector is available. So in order to keep your cells, you have to make it out of the specific biome alive. You don't have to complete the whole run, just that specific biome. Trust me, if we all had to complete the whole run to keep ourselves to give to the Collector for permanent upgrades, nobody would have any upgrades except for B.Me and Doc Firebird, and also Psyche.
Builds.
In Dead Cells, there are 3 build types you can spec into. Also, each of the 3 build types are tied to a specific color as well. Those 3 types consist of Brutality, which is associated with the color red. There's Tactics, which is associated with the color purple. And last but not least, we have Survival, which is associated with the color green. The colors are just another way to quickly tell what type of weapons and items you're using, which is more of an accessibility feature more than anything. Now, each of these 3 build types play very different from each other, but there can also be some overlap and familiarity. Fuck, man. There can also be some overlap and familiarity. Fuck, I can't say that word. Let's try one more time. But there can also be some overlap and familiarity. Fuck me, man. Between them as well. So let's break them down.
Brutality, huh?
Brutality is usually the melee focused up close and personal to your enemies, and most brutality weapons, if not all, are very quick sword strikes with minimal wind-up. You can say this is the most balanced build, and by balanced, I mean it's usually the build new players go to first, easy to pick up, but fairly hard to master. I don't mean balanced as in when you talk about buffs and nerfs, not that type of balance. Don't get me wrong, a brutality build, if synergized correctly, can be absolute OP, make game turn into baby mode type OP, but so can the rest of the build types as well, which is a beautiful thing about this game. Every build, weapon, and skills can definitely be viable. Next up we have tactics.
Tactics. Oh.
Tactic builds are the ranged option in this game. Think bows, throwing knives, spitting fire, shooting magic, coming on yourself, etc. If you're the type that likes to be a camping ass clown picking off your enemies from the safety of your tent, this build class is just for you. I'm just fucking with you. But yes, tactics is everything range based. Yes, there is a such thing as tactic builds having some up-close melee options as well, but that's few and far between compared to the slew of ranged options that tactic builds have. Now some may argue that tactic builds are the strongest builds to make out of the other two options. That may be true, but there's a huge drawback with tactic builds. You literally have no health. Tactic builds are the glass cannon of the game. That's why most people, when playing tactics, are always running disengagement, which is a mutation, but we aren't up to mutations yet, so stop fucking rushing me. But basically, you get hit once, especially in higher boss cell difficulties, you're basically dead. So it makes sense for tactic builds to be strongest because your body is at risk all times. And when it comes to 5BC, you can't afford to get hit at all because all health fountains are gone. So those flash charges you got on you better last you the whole fucking run. If you get hit in the first two biomes, you might as well throw the whole controller away. Nah, but seriously, if you get hit in the first two biomes and you feel like you need to use a health flask, you might as well restart the run. That's how scarce health is on the higher difficulties. But I just went on a tangent for no apparent reason. Let's get back on track. Personally, my favorite builds to run are tactic builds. Look who's the camping ass clown now, huh?
Survival.
Survival builds are all based on, you guessed it, surviving. What a smart person you are, fucking piece of shit. Meaning, it's the class with the most health available. Survival builds are very suitable for beginners to the game because it allows you to take a lot more hits of damage before dying. Now think of survival as the same thing as brutality, but with way more health. And instead of wielding a katana and dexterity type weapons, now you're wielding ultra great swords. So yes, there's always a trade-off. So yes, you can have way more health and can take way more damage. But why? Because all the weapons that survival builds have access to are slower than a sloth trying to cross a busy highway. That shit is going to take decades for it to make it across the highway. They are very slow. So your playstyle might have to adjust a tad bit while using survival builds. Now that you know the three build types, in the next episode, we will go over mutations, skills, affixes, synergies, scrolls, blueprints, and much more. So thanks for watching, thanks for your time, and stay tuned for part 2. I've been Cap, this has been Cap Originals. Go fuck yourself, peace.